Today we are looking at winners and losers from the Senior Bowl. Just got back from Mobile, finished watching the tape, and we're going to break down everybody that improved or hurt their stock. And we'll start positive. The first two guys I'm going to talk about would be my offensive and defensive MVPs from this week, and they're the two players in this video that I have first round grades on. The first guy is cornerback Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo. If you pay attention to the draft, you've probably heard this a million times, but heading into this week, the biggest question with Quinyon Mitchell is he's this elite, productive cornerback, but he hardly ever plays press coverage. And we didn't know if that was purely a scheme thing or if Toledo was trying to hide him, but he came out and was immediately the best cornerback on the field. It was clear a couple hours into the first practice that he had solidified his stock as a first-round pick. His press technique is still rough around the edges. He's a little bit undisciplined with his hips, so he's got some technique that he needs to refine. But I moved him from an early second-round grade to a late first. He's my cornerback 4 right now. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if he's the first cornerback off the board. To me, there's a cluster of kind of late first, early second round corners. I think there's 4 or 5 guys you can make a legitimate argument for as cornerback 1. My second player, also moving up to a late first round grade, is Oregon's center Jackson Powers Johnson. Very clean tape in his last year at Oregon, only allowed 1 pressure on 497 pass blocking snaps, but he didn't face many high-level interior pass rushers, and compared to a lot of guys, he just didn't have as many difficult one-on-one pass blocking reps. So seeing him come to the Senior Bowl, weigh in at 334 pounds, which is the heaviest weight ever for a center, and still have pretty much flawless tape in the one-on-ones, I think that solidifies him as a first-round pick. And the fact that he was working at guard also, that's not something that I had considered until now, but I think he projects as being able to play either of the 3 interior spots. Really impressed with his anchor, hand usage, and recovery ability in pass pro, and I'm usually a big positional value guy. That's really more of a top half of the first round thing. I think once you get into the 20s, if you've got a Tyler Linderbaum, Jackson Powers Johnson type of prospect that you feel really confident can be a good NFL starter immediately, I still think that's worth taking in the first round, even if you aren't getting this great surplus value that you would for some other positions. Another player that I think raised his stock in Mobile is Darius Robinson, edge rusher out of Missouri. He weighed in at 286 pounds. He's got almost 35-inch arms, so really the dream build for an edge rusher or a defensive end, but he's not a project. This was his first year playing on the edge, but he already knows what he's doing with his hands. He's got a pass rushing plan. He had a 3-play sequence in the second practice where he lines up over the right tackle, Tyler Guyton, beats him with a swim move, lines up over the center, beats him with a swim move, and then he lines up over the left tackle, beats him with, I think, an inside club. And that kind of epitomizes what Darius Robinson can give you as far as positional versatility, pass rushing skill set, and athleticism. He's getting some late first round buzz. That's a little bit too rich for me. He still does need to add more ways of winning with his hands besides just the swim move and the arm over, but he definitely fits the mold of one of those athletic edge rushers that sneaks into the back half of the first. Next up, we've got UConn guard Christian Haynes. I actually didn't raise my grade for him at all based on this past week. He was already a player I was super high on. All he did in Mobile is show up and look exactly like he did on his college tape against better competition. In pass pro, he had one of the most consistent anchors of any of the offensive linemen there. One rep, he just shut down Jordan Jefferson's bull rush, and it made him so mad he threw his helmet off. He's got a really firm punch, consistent inside hand placement, does a great job sliding his feet with crossface moves, and on tape, I think he's the best outside zone blocking offensive lineman in this class. If you're a team that runs a lot of outside zone and you need a guard, I think Christian Haynes is a ready-made plug-and-play outside zone blocker, and I was actually finishing up writing his report before I recorded this video. He's one of the players in this class that I've had the most difficult time coming up with negatives for. Next player to discuss is Kansas offensive lineman Dominic Pooney. He played left tackle at Kansas, but at the Senior Bowl, he was working at tackle, guard, and center. He's in a very difficult offense to evaluate. Kansas pretty much runs the triple option, and I thought his tape was good. There were just a lot of reps that you can't really evaluate because it's not as projectable to the NFL, but he was one of the best pass blockers in the one-on-ones at Mobile. Like I said, working at all 3 positions. He's really aggressive. He uses a lot of jump sets where you're getting hands on the pass rusher early, and I moved him up from a mid-4th to an early 3rd round grade. Definitely feel comfortable taking him on day 2. And then actually the next player on my board is going to be Roger Rosengarten, offensive tackle out of Washington. He was the best offensive tackle in the one-on-ones at the Senior Bowl. He had 11 one-on-one matchups and won every single rep rep. He's got elite range and recovery skills and pass protection, sliding around the pocket. He looks like a tight end. And especially on his college tape, I thought he was kind of inconsistent as far as set depth. Because he has the movement skills to recover in either direction, he doesn't have to be as precise getting to his landmarks. And in the NFL, that's something he needs to clean up because it can get him in trouble. But yeah, you can't teach his athletic traits. He does a great job with his hands. He's comfortable playing with independent hands, replacing his punch throughout the rep. I know there's a lot of Troy Fontenot love out there, but Roger Rosengarten is the Washington offensive tackle I'm targeting in this class. I also thought Texas offensive tackle Christian Jones had a nice week. He's been an underrated player in this class for a while. His biggest issue is just lateral movement skills and recovery. He is a little bit stiff moving side to side, but he's got long arms, refined hand placement. He's super powerful, and he's the most experienced offensive tackle in this class, both in terms of starts and total snaps played. Heading into the week, he was an early day 3 guy for me. I bumped him up to a late 3rd round grade. I think part of it's that I just had too low of a grade on him relative to how good his tape was, but seeing him have success against better competition obviously helps. Another player that impressed me was Florida State tight end Jaheim Bell. I initially had him as a top 100 player, but he was listed at 229 pounds at Florida State, and even though he does project as more of a move tight end, that's still just too low of a weight to play at in the NFL. So I ended up lowering his grade, but then he comes to the Senior Bowl, weighs in at 244 pounds, and looks just as athletic as he did on tape. He's playing at a good weight, still has the speed to beat people down the seam. He's creating separation as a route runner, made some difficult catches, so I actually just moved him back to the grade that I had for him originally. I thought the receivers were overall kind of underwhelming, but the clear best receiver in Mobile to me was Roman Wilson out of Michigan. He is a little bit undersized, but he's super explosive. He's a great route runner, consistent ball skills. If you're looking to take a day 1 ready slot receiver on early day 3, I think Roman Wilson is the guy to target in this class. Another riser is going to be Kingsley Eguakon, center out of Florida. On tape, he's one of the best zone blocking centers in this class, but he's not a finesse player. He's got so much raw power. He's a consistent block finisher. He plays with that nasty mean streak that you look for in offensive linemen. And in pass pro, he's a gambler. He's hitting on 16 no matter what the dealer has. You saw this play out clearly in the one-on-ones. He had as many dominant wins as anyone, just taking the fight to the pass rusher, early aggressive punch, putting them into the ground. But there was a play where he overextended a little bit. Brandon Dorlus was able to beat him inside with a spin move, but I think he's one of the more underrated players in this class. At this point, I have him as my 3rd ranked center. The biggest riser on my board from the Senior Bowl is cornerback Jarvis Brownlee Jr. out of Louisville. He was actually the last player that I watched before I headed out to Mobile. I had a 6th round grade on him heading into the week. He projects, I think, as a slot corner in a man-heavy scheme. I really like what he can do at the line of scrimmage. He punches above his weight class as a run defender, but he did get beat down the field for a touchdown against Notre Dame, and I only watched 4 games for my initial evaluation, so I had some questions about his speed, but I think he was probably the 2nd best cornerback in Mobile. Didn't seem to have any issues keeping up with receivers down the field, and the eye discipline and route recognition from Jarvis Brownlee was so impressive. He had multiple reps in the one-on-ones where he just did such a great job reading the receiver's hips, anticipating the route, basically ran a dig route for the receiver. He had a rep in the team period where he just planted Jaquan Jackson in press coverage, and he almost undercut him on a speed out for an interception, but he dropped the ball. Overall, I thought he was one of the more impressive players in Mobile. Definitely going to check out a couple more games, but at this point, I'm comfortable taking him early day 3. The next winner is going to be Evan Williams, safety out of Oregon. It's hard for safeties to really stand out at the Senior Bowl, but I thought he was clearly the best safety in Mobile. I'm actually not raising his grade at all. I thought he had good tape at Oregon, so I was already kind of high on him heading into the week, but he had some really nice reps on the 3rd day in the one-on-ones in the red zone, and I think he won like best safety on whatever team he was on. And then I thought the 3rd best corner at the Senior Bowl was Andrew Phillips out of Kentucky. He's undersized. He projects as more of a slot in the NFL, but he won all 5 of his one-on-one reps, which are built for the receiver to win those consistently. He had some really nice plays against Johnny Wilson, looking back and finding the ball in the air, and he went 2 for 2 against Ladd McConkey, who I think is the best receiver on the Senior Bowl roster. And then I've got 3 players that impressed me, but I hadn't watched them before the Senior Bowl. So these are going to be the next 3 guys that I watched that definitely caught my attention. Daijun Edwards, running back out of Georgia. I actually didn't know he was in this class when I watched Georgia's offense. Running back's another position that you can't really tell much from the Senior Bowl, especially this year because they didn't even do one-on-one pass blocking drills, but he caught the ball well. I was impressed with his movement skills and ability to cut, and just based off of my initial impression, I think he's probably going to have a higher grade than Kendall Milton, the other Georgia running back. Jackson Sermon, linebacker out of Cal, also caught my attention. Another position that's really hard to evaluate at the Senior Bowl, but he did a great job communicating. He had an interception in the team period. I don't have much more insight than that, but just watching him, he looks like a draftable linebacker, so I'll definitely check out his tape. And then Travis Glover, offensive tackle out of Georgia State, was a late addition. I don't even think he practiced on day 1, but I was really impressed with his movement skills. He did a great job mirroring speed rushers around the arc. He had a really nice rep where he caught a spin move with a firm inside hand. He's got the size, he's got the length, he seems to have good athletic traits, and it wouldn't surprise me if I end up with a draftable grade on him as well. All right, moving on to the losers. Not all of these guys really hurt their draft stock in my eyes. The majority of the players on this list actually have the same grade now that they did heading into the Senior Bowl, but there are some players that kind of confirmed my prior thoughts about them, and also some players that I think had a chance to raise their stock and just didn't really rise to the occasion. And that's the case for the first 2 players I'm going to talk about, both kind of raw developmental offensive tackles that could have played themselves into the early second, maybe even late first round conversation if they had a good week, but they show that there's still a ways to go with their development. The first guy is offensive tackle Patrick Paul out of Houston. He's got elite size and arm length, over 36-inch arms, and he's really smooth getting into his pass sets. Despite his size, he has no issues covering a lot of ground, but the hand placement and punch consistency with Patrick Paul is just not where it needs to be. If he's jump setting, he's shown the ability to have an accurate punch and get his hands inside, but when he's getting into an angle set or a vertical set and kind of letting the pass rusher come to him, he's just so wide and late with his punch. He's the definition of a block catcher. At this point, he just doesn't have the ability to block speed to power. He's consistently late with his punch, lets pass rushers get into his frame, and I don't think he has a terrible anchor, but at 6'7", if you're letting pass rushers establish early contact, you're just not going to put up much resistance in the NFL. I still like him. Like I said, I'm not lowering my grade on either of these first 2 players I'm going to talk about, but if he showed up and was a lot more consistent with his strike timing, he's a player based on his potential that I would be comfortable taking in the late first, and there's clearly still some development that needs to happen with him. And then very similar story with BYU offensive tackle Kingsley Suamataia. The difference with him is that his problems are a lot less consistent. There are times he flashes the ability to beat inside counters, other times he has a very soft inside hand, delayed recovery skills. On his college tape, you hardly ever saw him lose to a bull rush, but at the Senior Bowl, he was getting walked back into the pocket some, and he's just really inconsistent game to game, snap to snap. Still just 21 years old, has all the potential in the world, but you see some late first round hype for Kingsley Suamataia. I think that's definitely too rich at this point. I was also kind of underwhelmed by Auburn cornerback DJ James. I don't think he was terrible, but he measured in at 5'11 and a half, 170 pounds, and based on his tape, I was willing to live with him being so undersized because I thought he had elite fluidity and movement skills. Seeing him in person though, it's just nothing special. And for me to make an exception like that, which I am willing to do, you've got to be able to start, stop instantly, change directions and mirror routes unlike any bigger corners capable of. And he just looked like kind of an average cover corner that's also extremely undersized. The next loser is going to be Devontae Walker, wide receiver out of UNC. He's one of the 2 or 3 players that I've been way lower on than consensus. On tape, you can see that he's tall and fast, but there's just not a whole lot else that he does at a high level. His route running ability isn't anything to write home about, especially when it comes to curls and stop routes. There were multiple reps at the Senior Bowl where he took 2 seconds longer to throttle down than you want to see for a vertical threat receiver. And I had Mike Renner on the channel a couple weeks ago. He was making the point that if you're a corner covering Tez Walker, the formula is pretty simple. You just play play really soft coverage over the top, make sure that he doesn't run past you, and if he runs a curl or a comeback, you're gonna have plenty of extra time to get back in position. I thought his ball skills were inconsistent on tape, not terrible, but at the Senior Bowl, he just could not catch anything. He had too many drops to count, wasn't able to come up with contested catches. I'm doing this list based off of the practices, which to me is what really matters from the Senior Bowl, but I've got the game on the TV right now, and about 10 minutes ago, he just had another drop. This is a player that you'll see in the late 20s in some mock drafts, which I think before the Senior Bowl was already ridiculous, but I expect the first round hype to probably cool off after this week. I also lowered my grade on Oregon defensive lineman Brandon Dorlus. I didn't think he was terrible at the Senior Bowl. I'm just not exactly sure what his role or even position is going to be in the NFL. He's a really technically sound player. He's good with his hands, but he's not athletic or explosive enough to win around the edge. He's not a player that you want lining up as a 5 tech, but he also isn't big enough to be a defensive tackle and anchor against down blocks and double teams. So I think Dorlus is more of just a good college player that doesn't project that cleanly to the NFL. And then cornerback Kalen King out of Penn State, another player similar to Tez Walker that I'm not lowering my grade on them at all. I wasn't very high on them heading into the Senior Bowl, and all they really did in Mobile was confirm what I thought about them previously. Kalen King's a player that heading into the year, you'd find him in the top 10 of mock drafts for good reason. Watching Joey Porter Jr.'s tape in 2022, even though Porter had the more projectable NFL traits, Kalen King was the better college cornerback that year. And for most people, if you've seen one Kalen King game, it was the Ohio State matchup from 2023 where he just got cooked by Marvin Harrison Jr. He gave up like 100-something yards to him, but it was every snap, even on plays where he wasn't getting targeted, he was allowing so much separation. But when you watch the rest of his tape, it doesn't get a whole lot better. It gets less bad because he isn't going up against Marvin Harrison Jr. every game, but he just can't stick with anyone in man coverage. He's so jumpy at the line of scrimmage. He misses a lot of tackles, only had one pass breakup this year, and he was one of the worst cornerbacks at the Senior Bowl. Every bowl, there's a few players at each position that kind of clearly establish themselves as being in the lower tier, and if you get a win on them in the one-on-ones, it's kind of less impressive. You got to take it with a grain of salt. That was Kalen King this week. If a receiver beat him, it's like, okay, that's a nice route, but it was against Kalen King. And I've said if the 2022 tape didn't exist, if all I had to evaluate was last year's tape, I would have an undrafted grade on Kalen King. I'm probably going to end up having him somewhere on day 3 just because the 2022 tape was really good and he was a first to early second round type of prospect back then. But the more I think about it and the more I see from him, there's just not a big market in the NFL for 5'11", 190 corners that can't stick with anyone in man coverage. I was disappointed with what I saw from Maryland safety Bo Braid. I really liked his tape, and the Senior Bowl, like I said, for safeties is really difficult to evaluate. A lot of the one-on-one reps especially, you just have to kind of throw out because, I mean, half the time he's matched up with a receiver, but it was really just seeing him turn and try to accelerate down the field. To me, he moves like an undersized linebacker. There's just not a whole lot of explosiveness or really top-end speed. And in the NFL, if you're playing safety, there are times you're gonna have to turn your hips and run down the field. So I still like him. I'm not completely out on him after watching 3 practices, but he definitely looks like a less explosive athlete than I thought based on his tape. And then another undersized Auburn defensive back, safety Jalen Simpson, is also gonna continue to fall for me. He had a few really good games to start the year. The Auburn game was probably one of the best individual safety performances from this season, but he cooled off over the second half. Every game that I watched, I kind of lowered him from the, I think, 3rd round grade that I initially had on him. And at the Senior Bowl, he just looked too small to really stick with anyone in man coverage. Any kind of push off or even just incidental contact sends him flying 3 yards in the opposite direction. And you already saw concerns with that on his tape. He's not a consistent tackler at all. So yeah, Jalen Simpson wasn't really on anyone's radar as an NFL prospect heading into the year. He shot up draft boards at the start of the season, and I think since then has continued to fall back down to earth. I was also disappointed with wide receiver Jacob Coing out of Arizona. He's 5'8.5", 165 pounds, but like I've said, I'm willing to make an exception for an undersized receiver. I was really high on Tank Dell last year. I think you've got to look at these on a case-by-case basis and evaluate the actual skill set and how that lack of size impacts their game. With Jacob Coing, I just didn't think he did a great job fighting through contact. He had some focus drops, and he actually got injured on day 3. Hopefully he's okay. That's not really impacting my grade at this point, but he just didn't really separate himself from the undersized day 3 receivers in this class. Another player that I thought was underwhelming, but it's not really changing my grade on them, is tight end AJ Barner out of Michigan. He's probably the best blocking tight end in this class, and on tape, he flashed some potential as a route runner. He's not an elite athlete, but there were times that he looked like someone that could separate with craftiness and route nuance. At the Senior Bowl, though, he just couldn't pull away from anyone, and I think his role in the NFL is pretty limited. Wisconsin center Tanner Bordellini was probably one of the worst offensive linemen in Mobile. I thought he had interesting tape and could maybe be an early day 3 type of player, but he measured in with really short arms. He was consistently late with his punch, and he was just getting worked by every type of pass rushing move. He was losing a power. He was letting people cross his face. To me, he kind of played himself into the late day 3 range. And then I've got 3 players that I had late day 3 grades on, and I'm not lowering them, but they basically just confirmed what I thought about them. Ladarius Henderson, guard out of Michigan. He actually played left tackle in college, but he's definitely going to be a guard in the NFL. He has really long arms. He's an okay straight line athlete, but there's just no lateral recovery ability, and his hand usage is all over the place. He's a complete project to me, not someone that I want playing at all in their first year. Ainias Smith, wide receiver out of Texas A&M. I thought he was one of, if not the worst receivers in Mobile. For a short, undersized player, the explosiveness out of his breaks is just nowhere close to where it needs to be. And then Ethan Driscoll, offensive tackle out of Marshall, I think is just too tall to play tackle in the NFL. Over 6'8", he just gets long armed to death, lets people pry open his inside shoulder. He's probably going to be a late 7th to priority free agent. And then Willie Drew, cornerback out of Virginia State, I was pretty excited to watch, but he was in the Kalen King tier of not being able to cover anyone. He had a nice interception, but outside of that, he was just getting beat routinely. And then the final loser is just going to be the quarterbacks. Really, outside of Michael Pratt, I thought he was pretty clearly the best quarterback in Mobile, but every quarterback that I think had a chance of going in the first 5 rounds was pretty underwhelming to me. Bo Nix, Michael Penix, Spencer Rattler, and Joe Milton all struggled with ball placement the entire week, really. I didn't lower any of these quarterbacks' grades. I don't really think the Senior Bowl is a major part of their evaluation, but none of them really did anything to help themselves or pull away from the pack. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments any NFL draft prospects that you'd like me to cover. And if you want to see my full draft board as an interactive filterable table, I've got that up at A2ZSports.com. The link to that is in the description.